Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, overwhelmed Christians who want to stop living in the crazy and start living in freedom and abundance and peace. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Hello.
And we're so glad that you guys are here with us on this wonderful Thursday. As you guys know, we work our way through the CSCs, and they are being calm, surrendered, centered, connected, and complete, because we found that those really are the difference between having an insane life and having that freedom and abundance and peace. This week we are talking about addiction.
In this case, the opposite of connection, isolation, is something that both encourages addictive behavior and drives us to it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or is that the same thing?
Yes.
It causes it and it
causes it. Well, I think of it as a cycle, which I know I like to talk about cycles all the time. But seriously, when you're isolated, you're more likely to engage in addictive behavior. And then as you're engaging in it, you're, full of shame, which causes you to isolate more, which causes you to engage in addictive behavior, which,
Yeah. It's a spiral.
A negative downward spiral of frustration and stress and awfulness.
Yeah. And I think with this, it's particularly hard because with an addiction we've been calling it vice this week, but I think another word for it could be secret sin. That could be totally different. That could be a different category.
I disagree.
Yeah?
Yes, because I think a lot of people are really open about their vice. And it's a way to make it seem like it's okay. If you're really hey everybody, I love to eat and I eat all the time.
Yeah, it could be. I guess it depends on what it is. Yeah, there's some socially acceptable ones that...
Right, I guess I'm just remembering this church that we went to a while back. The pastor, from the pulpit was like, oh yeah, I love to eat. And, was patting his overweight self and was like, dude.
Yeah. But he's not up there saying, you know what, when I'm stressed out, I just eat 12 donuts and I'm good to go. He's not connecting it to a vice, really. It's just...
No, I think he was talking about when he's stressed.
Oh, okay.
But I just remember being like, dude, do you not realize that this is an addiction also?
Yeah. So maybe secret in the sense of sometimes it's just... There's some, a secret from ourselves that it's even a problem. And
yeah,
then sometimes
I could see that.
And some addictions definitely are secrets from everybody. Even some alcoholics, nobody knows that they're alcoholics, or some people, I don't know how they do it, or smokers and nobody ever knew about it, or definitely kids keeping their drug use secret from their parents or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes we flaunt it. I don't know. I'm trying to get to the thing that makes it makes isolation so prevalent when we're talking about addiction. I think maybe we don't know why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, I think part of it is just, like I said, that shame piece. And so even if we're flaunting it in a way that's hey, stay away from this part of my life.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's a way to hide, isn't it? It's look,
right,
I already confessed that to everybody in the church. You don't need to ask me about it and dig deeper.
Yes, it's a way to be nothing to see here, because look, it's all out in the open. But really, it's just as much as hiding as never telling anybody.
Yeah, because nobody knows what it is that's so stressful that makes you want to eat all those donuts, or that's the thing that breaks the spell of the addiction, is getting down to the thing under the thing.
Right, exactly.
And it is a kind of shielding to do that kind of casual talk about it.
Yeah,
it's dishonest.
It kind of makes it seem like you've already dealt with it as much as you're going to deal with it, or, that it's really not that big of a deal.
Or I've got it under control.
Right,
I know
exactly.
about this. I know what's going on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing we need to try to do is dive in and get a deeper understanding of the sinfulness of sin. Because these little things that, like a white lie or whatever, like the donut, I'm just I wouldn't call myself a foodaholic, but I definitely love to eat. Like, we're not diving into the depths of how much of a problem that actually is for our spiritual life.
Right.
We're kind of refusing to see a piece of truth there.
Well, and I think it's hard, too, to differentiate sometimes between a vice and between, like, a God-given enjoyment of something. You know, like, when we're talking about food, there are definitely certain foods that I love. Like, you know, having a good piece of cheesecake just makes my day.
Sure.
But it's not something that I turn to when I'm stressed. It's just when I have it, I'm like, oh, this is so fun. I feel like that's something that I've been working on the last couple of years, because recognizing that I have a lot of stress around food. And so for me, I almost never enjoy my food. Like, it is a chore to eat. If I could ignore the whole thing, I totally would. And so being able to say, okay, a healthy view of food is enjoying your food too, because God gave it to us to enjoy. But enjoying the right amount, you know, at the right time, different things like that. So I think it can be hard too to be like, when is this a vice and when is this just how God designed it to be?
And so many of them can just be normal.
Right.
I mean, sex is normal, eating is normal, sleeping is
Media.
normal, working. Yeah. And so you can shut down a connection if somebody is brave enough as a brother or sister to come up and be like, hey, do you think you're like a little too into your show? Or
right.
You talk about food a lot, but do you ever really think about what's going on there?
And we're not saying, you know, let anybody say whatever they want to say. Or even, like, there have been times when people have said stuff to me and
sure,
it's been very difficult to hear. And it hasn't been accurate. But I've had to still, like, pray about it and be like, okay, Lord, is this true? Is this not true? You know, show me your truth. Because I think so often we're just blind. Not on purpose, but...
Yeah, and it's different if it's coming from somebody who really knows you versus someone that you only kind of say hi to on Sunday morning, but you don't really know anything about their life.
Yeah, although outside influence can be good.
Well, that's,
but
like you said, but then you considered it prayerfully and you weighed it in your heart and before the Lord to try to see what you're supposed to do.
And then I was like, dang, that is so... I don't understand what is going on here.
Yeah. So one thing I was struck with this week in my quiet time was I was reading Nehemiah, and in Nehemiah 9, there's a great passage there. Like Nehemiah came from Babylon, and a whole bunch of people came back from exile, and they were rebuilding the city and the walls and everything. And once they got the city and the walls and the gates all rebuilt, the priests and everybody was getting the scripture back out. And they had a public reading of the scripture where everybody came around, and it caused them, it says in 9, I don't have it in front of me, but it caused the people to confess their sins to one another.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an amazing power, like, of this connection and addiction there. Like, we should be compelled to receive that kind of feedback, like you were just saying, and prayerfully consider it, but to also confess. Not wait for someone to confront us, but to be like, you know, this is something, I can't quit doing this thing. I need help. And to go get the right people involved in helping you do that.
Definitely. That actually was something else that I wrote down too. You know, Brené Brown's work on shame is amazing. If you haven't read any of her books or been exposed to her through her TED Talks or her work on Oprah, or she's done lots of stuff. But seriously, her stuff is amazing. And she found that when she was studying shame, she found that the antidote to shame is empathy, which is why it's so important to share with the right people.
Yeah.
But if you can come in your shame and be like, I'm stuck, I need help, to someone who will not just say like, oh yeah, I want to help you and try to fix you, but somebody who understands and who can just sit with you and be like, that sucks.
Yeah, I think that the power here is going to be in a true and good expression of the deep emotions that we're turning to our addiction to handle. And one of them is shame. Like, we can try to avoid shame by engaging in more shameful behavior, ironically enough.
Right.
But then if it stays a secret, we tend to think the addict is like, okay, I'm dealing with it. But yeah, finding the right people to sit in that shame where they're not going to pile on more shame, but they're going to extend grace and empathy. Those people are out there. There are systems in place to help.
Yeah. Well, and even, you can find those people in your friend groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy, but like we've talked about before with doing vulnerability tests, like just doing a little bit of a like, hey, something small so that people can either accept it and handle it well or not handle it well, and you can be like, well, I'm not going to share my bigger thing with them,
Yeah. Or I was just even thinking there could be events, corporate events like this thing in Nehemiah. Everybody was on the same page, and that's pretty rare, but it can happen where everybody's coming together and sharing their heart, and like they're engaging in this godly sorrow of like, we haven't been obeying the law. We just found out all this stuff that we haven't been doing, and now we're going to try to start doing it. But there's all this sorrow too. I mean, they just a few chapters earlier divorced their foreign wives and children and sent them all away, and that they were engaged in sorrow there too, where they're just like, but their commitment to God, their new commitment to God was more powerful than that. But it is this very sorrowful activity. This happened to me, like in one of the men's groups I was in. We'd been meeting for a few months, and we were starting to learn to trust each other because these are just a bunch of people we just met, But we all knew we had the addiction in common. And a lot of the guys in there were dads, I think almost everybody. And they'd been married at least once. So but once it came out that people were like, I'm worried that I'm like a loser or not a manly enough man or something like this. And everybody, like the person who started, I don't remember who it was, but that started this domino effect of like, me too. Like it was the right group to share that deepest fear of. And it was just like, and then we could say, I feel the same way. I'm worried about that too. Like I'm not good enough or whatever, or, and because those things are driving this addiction. And then to also say, I just saw how brave you were, and that is very manly,
Right.
We can redefine that a little bit with the help of, the counselor and stuff.
Right. Well, and it's so powerful. I remember the first time when I was in a therapy group and somebody was like, oh yeah, this is my situation also. It was like, I can't even tell you because I had felt so alone. Mm-hmm. And so just like this, I'm so messed up, and that's why this is bothering me. And, I should just be able to suck it up. And why am I so upset over this? And then having somebody else be like, yeah, that's a big deal.
And you really believe them. Like they were really, it was true that they.
Well, because they were in the same place.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know. It was just so healing having somebody be there and sit with me and empathize because they were there too. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and I think coming back to that example we talked about earlier in the show, the guy who is flaunting the food addiction or the food coping mechanism, and maybe it wouldn't call it addiction, like he's preventing that kind of connection from happening.
Right.
Because once we say this is a problem and I want to do something about it, and I want to be connected to God and to my fellows because that's where the progress happens,
right,
then some real progress can be made.
Right. I think it's so interesting that, addictions tend to make us isolated, but the more isolated we are, the less we can grow. Like, we just kind of get stuck there. And
that's why I think, like, addiction, in a way, it's like, I feel like our culture uses it a lot, and I feel like that kind of softens it. But in a way, I also think it's a very strong word that needs to be used. Like, it depends on if we're on what side of the coin we're on. If we're minimizing our own behavior, it's like, I'm not addicted. Like, then to say I'm addicted to candy, like that could be a very powerful kind of awakening thing. And like, I need to get help. And otherwise, if it's just like, I'm addicted to whatever, then it's like, well, then you need to You need to dig into your feelings a little bit more and share that with somebody. Don't share your addiction. Share the thing that drives you to that, if you can try to figure out what that is.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing I wrote down, is kind of the antidote to that shame, besides empathy from another person, is the gospel of grace.
Yes.
The more we push into that, because when we're isolated and we feel like we've got the weight of the weight of the world on our shoulders, we don't have that close connection with the Lord. We've talked about before how surrender is like having a hose without any kinks in it, so the Holy Spirit can flow through us, and our sin puts those kinks in us, and it keeps us from having a good connection with the Lord. So, we lose that understanding of grace. And that I was just reading this morning in, I think it's Luke 2, where the angels are announcing to the shepherds that Jesus is coming, that he's been born. And it just struck me, that little section where it says that God's favor is upon men.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it's because we've been reading several books with our girls that have the Greek gods in them. And we just watched Wonder Woman, different things like that, and thinking about how, how their favor was so, like, they had favor towards men. They didn't have favor towards men. They didn't, it was like very fickle. Yes. So the fact that God's favor is always towards us is just incredible. And we forget that. If you are not sure whether you have any addictions or not, one of the great places to start is to ask the Lord to show you.
Definitely.
Because I know he's very faithful to do that.
Yeah. Read some of the David Psalms where he talks about, search my heart, O God, reveal yourself to me and myself to me. Help me understand myself.
Definitely. We love you guys, and we are praying for you. Hope that you're having a wonderful holiday season and that you can really hang on to the CSCs in the middle of it. Thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show. We really, really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it with 2 or 3 of your friends or family or complete strangers, whoever. And come back tomorrow and we will keep talking about addiction, and we'll talk about being complete in the middle of that.
All right. Talk to you then. Thanks for listening.
Bye.